Hello, my name is Jason, and I will be discussing the NHL lockout of 2004 and 2005, the negotiations between players and owners. Conflict and negotiation. The conflict was the salary cap. The league was unsatisfied with the player's salary. The league wants players to have a lower percentage of the revenue, while the players want a higher percentage. So the conflict was between the players' compensation. The league felt that they were being compensated too much, while the players were satisfied with what they were receiving. According to Dave Manuel, the NHL, led by Commissioner Gary Bettman, wanted to link players' costs to league revenues in an effort to attain cost certainty. The players, on the other hand, wanted nothing to do with the salary cap, which is what they claimed that cost certainty would represent. So the two sides began negotiating. They were negotiating an agreement that would be beneficial for both parties and that would be fair compensation to the players and also fair to the league itself. No agreement was reached before initial deadlines, and for the first time in history, a professional sports season was canceled. According to Paul D. Studar, the epic lockout resulted in a loss of the entire 04-05 National Hockey League season and produced an outcome slanted largely in favor of the owners: a salary cap, a pay cut for players, new free agency rules, a new drug testing policy, and changes in rules that were among agreements reached in the settlement. The parties involved were the NHL team owners, or the league, versus the NHL players, which were represented by the NHLPA, the NHL Players Association. The NHL commissioner was Gary Bettman, and the NHLPA executive director was Bob Goodenow. The positions of both sides was ultimately the same, was money. The league was concerned over its revenue and how much it was giving out to the players, and the players were concerned with how much they were receiving in their contracts. The biggest difference was who was getting what percentage of the pie, what piece of the pie they were getting. The NHL's position was a salary cap. That was their want. The Canadian press said, the NHL believes that too much money is being paid out in salaries and has proposed a system to address it. They're calling for the players' share in revenue to be set to 49% next season, down from 57% in expiring deal, and propose that it drop a 47% by the end of the 6-year deal. Now the NHL's position was they wanted a fair compensation. So both sides wanted money. They wanted to be paid what they believed was fair, or give out what they thought was fair. So what drove these wants? Well, there's the underlying interest. The NHL's interest was the cost compared to revenue. They were concerned with how much it takes to facilitate the sport and how much that they were actually drawing in. And according to Paul D. Studar, because revenues did not keep pace with salaries, the league contended that it lost approximately $1.8 billion over the previous decade. So they found that if they were taking on all this cost and all this loss, that they would not be able to build a competitive league, or the teams would not be able to be competitive if they weren't as lucrative. Now the NHLPA, the players, their interest was in having a well-rounded contract. They were concerned that they would be limited to these contracts and where they can go, where they would play, and what their benefits would be. So now this led into negotiation techniques and concepts. In the negotiating process, each side used objective criteria, and the objective criteria they used was data collected from previous years, salaries from previous seasons, or the revenues that the teams made throughout previous years. In this process, there was also a lot of negative emotions, especially from fans and players who were not reacting too well to the lockout. The lockout forced some players to not have a job for a season and took away all the sporting events for the fans. Both sides somewhat voiced their opinions, but ultimately handled it by staying focused on on the negotiation and not with what was happening. And also, the players had BATNAs. They had alternatives. The NHL is not the only league that they can play in. There are several European leagues, and during the lockout, many of the players did go overseas to play in other leagues. So what went well in this process? Well, the fact that both sides were able to start working together and communicating a deal that was beneficial for both sides is really what worked out the best, is that they established ways to communicate with one another. Because initially, this was the problem, and that's what went wrong. The sides did not have effective communication, and in not doing so, they did not meet deadlines. The lockout happened. There was a whole season lost. There was a lot of irreversible damage that came about this. And ultimately, both sides agreed on a salary cap, and they both had intentions of getting to the salary cap. So if they would have been able to communicate, their wants, their interest, their positions to one another in an effective manner, this kind of disaster of the season being locked out would not have happened. Ultimately, both sides were able to reach an agreement, and hockey was back on. According to Michael McCarthy and Mike Brem, these are the key points of the deal. Player compensation is limited to 54% of the league revenues, and an escrow account will be set up to guarantee the adherence. A team payroll cap of $39 million and a minimum of $21.5 million for the 05-06 season. A 24% rollback on all existing contracts, and a maximum player salary equal to 20% of the team cap, which was $7.8 million in the 05-06 season. A minimum salary of $450,000 up from the $175,000 minimum. And there was also a drop in the age for unrestricted free agency over the course of the deal. Now, when looking at this, it's pretty obvious to see who really came out ahead. The NHL league and owners got a better deal than the players. But this agreement was beneficial, meaningful, and somewhat long-term. According to Paul D. Studer, while the payroll cap keeps cost under control, it also promotes a partnership between owners and players. Under the 54% guarantee to the players, the more money the owners make, the more money the players can earn. So their fates are intertwined. And I think that's what makes this agreement so meaningful, is the fact that this kind of growth can happen together, or they're both benefiting together. There's this kind of relationship that's been established. And that's, again, reiterating what was the good that came out of this. They communicated, they're working together. Do I think that there will be a window of opportunity to negotiate in the future? I certainly do, as the league grows in popularity and all that. I think there will be more concerns with player compensation in comparison to league revenues. And also, because the deal is somewhat heavily in favor of one side, I think that will pose future problems. Ultimately, I'm happy as a fan that the league was back, but I think the negotiations need to be improved on to avoid future lockouts and future problems. And hopefully, in this process, they learned how to communicate and work well and negotiate with one another and avoid these kind of problems, such as a lockout. Thank you.